So, 尚清华 jogged with Jijue all the way to training grounds. On the high basalt platform, Liu Qingge and Shen Qingqiu were in actual fact merely crossing swords in an orderly match. Liu Qingge's movement were much slower than usual. Rather than calling it crossing swords, you might as well have called it feeding his opponent training strikes. The space between his brows was still rather smooth, and it emanated none of his typical homicidal tendencies. Just then, Shen Qingqiu's sword struck air. He knitted his brows, and his left hand twitched. Shang Jinghua's heart suddenly stretched taut. He glanced at Jijue out of the corner of his eye and saw that his expression was also twitched, like he had an urge to shout out loud. The two glanced at each other in a flash of wordless understanding. Jijue, his heart still palpitating, said in a low voice, "I always feel like Shen Qingqiu is about to deploy a concealed weapon dipped in poison or something." Shang Jinghua expressed his deep agreement. Heroes think alike. It looked like Ji Marshall Brother understood this character very thoroughly. Exactly what he expected from the fellow who had once picked a fight with Shen Qingqiu at a brothel. They were old enemies who had both soundly lost the faces of 2 whole peaks. Shen Qingqiu drew back Xiuya's sword and stopped to think. For one, he didn't let out a laugh cold like rustling wind, and for two, he didn't look askance at anyone. If one looked at him now, one would see a mild brow and a peaceful gaze that still carried a modest air of elegant nobility. Soon after, Shen Qingqiu said, "I don't understand." Liu Qingge flicked a swift and fierce flourish with his sword. "Don't understand what?" A disciple next to Jijue muttered, "Heavens, he doesn't understand again." I can't take it anymore," another disciple said quietly. "My stomach feels bad. I'm going back." "Marshall Brother, wait for me. Me too," Jijue said hurriedly. His Marshall Brother pushed him back. "Stay, didn't you just get back?" On the platform, Shen Qingqiu said, "Just then, in those few moves, if I blocked your sword with my right hand and let loose a spiritual blast with my left, finding an opportunity to strike your stomach, I would have had a chance of winning." "Not possible," Liu Qingge scoffed. "Most possible," Shen Qingqiu persisted. "If you could have won, why didn't you try it?" "Isn't it just sparring?" Shen Qingqiu said, aloof. Attacking in earnest would be out of line. Liu Qingge didn't bother to reply. Instead, he yelled into the crowd below the platform, "You, get up here." The person he selected ascended the platform with an expression like the hero Yishui, grimly prepared to stare death in the face. Using the method Shen Qingqiu had suggested, they traded a few blows with Liu Qingge before getting blown straight off the platform by Chen Luan's sword. Liu Qingge sheathed his sword and turned to Shen Qingqiu. "See, it wouldn't work." Shen Qingqiu snapped open his fan and waved it in front of his chest. "I see," he said, all smiles. "Liu Marshall Brothers' reflexes are too fast. It wouldn't work after all." "Every time he says, 'I don't understand,' Liu Marshall Brother grabs someone to demonstrate until he understands," Jijue quietly complained to Shang Jinghua. No wonder the injuries at Baizhan Peak had only increased over the past few days, while Qiancao Peak's front courtyard was as busy as a marketplace. Shang Jinghua had only one thought in response to this: that Shen Qingqiu had to be doing this on purpose. After he descended the platform, Liu Qingge continued to train, beat up, the Baizhan Peak disciples. Shen Qingqiu and Shang Qinghua exchanged greetings, then walked down the mountain together. Just as they were about to exit through the gate, Jijue caught up to them, carrying 2 sacks, which he gave to Shen Qingqiu and Shang Qinghua. Shang Qinghua didn't understand, so he undid the tie to take a look. Inside, he saw 2 balls of bloody, hairy things nestled together. He began, and this is... "Little martial brother caught these short-haired beasts," Jijue said, expression stiff. "Apparently, they taste very good. Martial brother, please take them back to your own peaks to cook them as you please." "Short-haired beast? What short-haired beast? Did I really ever create this creature? Is it edible? Are you sure?" It looked like Shen Qingqiu was also highly suspicious of the creature's edibility. "Thanks for your trouble," he replied. "Martial brother said, this is a gift in return for the tea leaves Qing Peak recently sent," Jijue recited woodenly. Tea leaves? Shen Qingqiu had given Liu Qingge tea leaves? What was this? Were they exchanging presents? Internally, Shang Qinghua yelled, "Holy shit!" while externally he kept a smile on his face. "You mean to say that this is all thanks to Shen Martial Brother's generosity? What sort of high-quality tea leaves were these?" "They were harvested from the tea fields of my senior disciple, Mingfan's family," Shen Qingqiu said affably. "As for whether they high quality, won't Shang Martial Brother know if he comes for tea at Qing Peak?" Shang Qinghua thickened his face, shameless. Then I have Liu Martial Brother's generosity to thank as well." So, each carrying a sack, talking about this and that, they walked toward Qing Peak. As soon as they passed the mountain gates, serene wind caressed their faces and faint birdsong chittered away. It was an atmosphere entirely distinct from that of the outer world. Together, they walked over a soft layer of green bamboo leaves that covered the ground and found themselves feeling several times more refreshed. For some reason, Shen Qingqiu's mood was quite good. He didn't look the least bit like he had just lost to Liu Qingge. He even offered an idle bit of praise. "Liu Martial Brother's swordsmanship is truly quite something," Shang Qinghua couldn't resist reminding him. "Shen Martial Brother, how many times did you lose?" Shen Qingqiu thought it over. You're asking about this morning. It was only 7 or 8 times. Then how are you this calm? Shouldn't you be gnashing your teeth in fury, tears staining your face like raindrops on flower petals? A cuckoo crying blood as you whip around to go back into seclusion for 3 months swearing to duel again? Don't you know you're being OOC? Can't you show a bit more dedication to your role? Shen Qingqiu bashfully tapped the handle of his fan on his nape. "There's nothing you can do about losing to the Baizhan Peak Lord. It would be more accurate to say that winning would be the unusual outcome." Shang Qinghua had no words. He felt there was no way to communicate with this guy. He's lost his memory. He's definitely fell into a qi deviation and lost his memory. If this Shen Qingqiu and Liu Qingge were playing out a scene of a friendly senior and his respectful junior, full of harmonious fraternal love between 2 sect members. Oh, heavens! Maybe in a few days, Shen Qingqiu and Luo Binghe would be striking up flirtatious banter. The second after this frightful vision flashed through Shang Qinghua's mind, a white shadow darted toward them, and something sticky and clinging suddenly threw itself into Shen Qingqiu's arms. The soft, little lump called out, 世尊. Shen Qingqiu was nearly knocked onto his back. He swayed, then grabbed onto a thick bamboo stalk and finally managed to regain his footing. He noticed Shang Qinghua detachedly observing the scene, expressionless. You couldn't fault Shang Qinghua for his frozen expression. At the sight of that wee little lady killer with his 2 arms encircling Shen Qingqiu's waist like a steel hoop, the name Binghe had nearly escaped his mouth. Shen Qingqiu stiffly waved his fan with one hand, embarrassed. If you're going to call to me, then just call. Don't drag your voice out like that, throwing yourself at people every day, and while your martial uncle is here. What manner of decorum is this? Luo Binghe slowly removed his hands and stood straight. He obediently said, Shang martial uncle. Then he said, after this disciple finished morning lessons, he waited here for Shizun to return. I forgot myself in a moment of excitement. Great Master Airplane shooting towards the sky's heart nearly crumbled. Luo Binghe switched to hugging Shen Qingqiu's arm. Shizun, why were you out for so long? There were a lot of people today. As Shang Qinghua took in Shen Qingqiu's leisurely and contented smile, he couldn't resist guessing how many times the Qingjing Peak Lord, quote, hadn't understood earlier, and how many times he'd had Liu Qingge, quote, demonstrate for him. Luo Binghe automatically took the sack out of Shen Qingqiu's hands. Next time, can I go too? That depends on your progress in swordplay, Shen Qingqiu said casually. There's some sort of monster in the sack. Liu Marshal Brother said it's edible. See if you can clean off the hair and figure out how to cook it. You made Binghe into a kitchen girl? Only the female protagonists are allowed to eat the male protagonist's cooking. Can't you stay in your place? Forget it. Shang Qinghua didn't have the energy. Oh, Luo Binghe happily agreed. As he shook the sack, the thing inside suddenly began to struggle. Shizun, it's still alive. By the time they arrived at the drawing room of the bamboo house, Shen Qingqiu's flock of disciples had surrounded that mysterious creature and were taking turns poking the sack. With each poke, that short-haired beast let out a plaintive cry, and yet they were delighted each time, clicking their tongues in wonder. Shizun, it really is still alive. What do we do if it's still alive? Do we still kill and eat it? Let's not. It's so pitiful. Shang Qinghua forced himself to ignore this flock of young disciples sitting all around the ground and lowered his head to drink his tea, his heart twitching. He remembered the last time he'd come. Every disciple had worn a face full of great bitterness and deep resentment. They'd stood like pines or sat like clocks, each with an old text in hand, reciting wherever they went like they were chanting curses, quoting chapter and verse when they spoke, a musical cadence to their voices. When he looked at them today, was this still that renowned Qingjing Peak that produced countless poser youths full of literary airs? This place had become a daycare center for ADHD children. If it's still alive, then keep it as a pet, said Shen Qingqiu. Let's eat it. Let's just eat it, Mingfan hurriedly retorted. We've never kept one before. We don't know how much it needs to eat, and change its water and take it out for walks and whatnot will be awfully troublesome. Ning Ying pouted. That's enough. If we keep it, it definitely won't be you taking care of it. Shizun would obviously give it to Luo. She lifted her head and asked, Shizun, where did you get this strange thing? The Baizhan Peak Lord gave it to me, a return gift for the tea. At this, Ning Yingying whined.
世尊, I don't like Baijian Peak. They're so annoying. Last time they used their superior sword skills to bully A Luo. They were chasing and beating him.
Shang Qinghua thought that this was quite normal. Baijian Peak's uniform malice toward Luo Binghe was entirely natural. It was the sort of instinctive reaction single-celled organisms had toward traces of concealed evil. This wasn't throwing shade at Baijian Peak. Shang Qinghua was a fan of theirs, for his part. After enumerating their shortcomings, Ning Yingying put forth her request.
世尊, you have to help us teach them a good lesson.
Shen Qingqiu choked once, turned toward Shang Qinghua, and smiled politely as he coughed. These children, what are they on about? There ought to be harmony and familial affection within the sect. How could I teach them a good lesson for such a reason? Shang Qinghua repeatedly stated his agreement, returning the same forced smile and drinking tea like his life depended on it.
Miss Ning Yingying,
your Shizun doesn't need to make a move. Liu Jingge has already taught him quite a cruel lesson. In fact, Shen Qingqiu is in charge of, quote, harmony and familial affection, and Liu Jingge is in charge of, quote, teaching them a good lesson. This right here is a true nature of a hypocrite. Shang Qinghua was deeply comforted by this. Even after going through a qi deviation and losing his memory, sure enough, Shen Qingqiu was still his treacherous old self. Luo Binghe had gone to fetch tea leaves, and at this moment he entered the drawing room to present them to Shang Qinghua. Come, Master Brother, we have been indebted to Anding Peak's care for a long time now, said Shen Qingqiu. But one kid on the floor was still unwilling to back down.
世尊, you have to avenge A Luo,
Ning Yingying said, impassioned. Shen Qingqiu was at the end of his patience. Yingying, go play outside. You mustn't avenge me or whatever else, Luo Binghe said hastily. It's just that this disciple's skill is inferior to theirs, and he lost face for Shizun and Qingjing Peak. Your foundation is just a bit lacking, and you can't expect to catch up to them straight away, Shen Qingqiu said, offering words of comfort. As long as you remain diligent, giving some time, you will assuredly surpass them. Ming Fan scoffed. Huh, it will take 100 years for him to surpass Baijian Peak. Ning Yingying flew into a temper.
If you look down on Qingjing Peak and A Luo that much, why don't you just go to Baijian Peak and see if they'll take you?
Shen Qingqiu put his head in his hands. Didn't I tell you to go outside and play? Why are you still here? Binghe, get them outside quick. Don't make a circus of yourselves in here. All right, Shizun. But as for this thing, are we eating it or keeping it? Shang Qinghua was struck dumb. He was choking down so much that his heart was about to stop. This scene, featuring Shen Qingqiu as the ever-attentive teacher and Luo Binghe as the clingiest hanger-on.
What the hell was this? Don't fucking tell me Shen Qingqiu really did go to Baijian Peak and mess with people just to avenge Luo Binghe.
This benevolent father and filio-son act. No. It was more like, quote, lifting one's tray to eyebrow level. No. Quote, treating each other as honored guests. This was even more fantastical than Shen Qingqiu and Liu Jingge's harmonious spa. If things kept going on like this, maybe there really would be a day when they exchanged flirtatious banter. If that day really came, he'd eat 3 kilos of shit. After Great Master Aeroplane finished swearing, he had a rare moment of careful thought. He had never quite used classical idioms properly, and he had hauled out his limited supply to describe Liu Mingyan's beauty. The ones he used with the highest frequency were, quote, soft bosoms trembling and, quote, as delicate as the finest gossamer. To use, quote, treating each other as honored guests was correct here, right? If he looked at the literal meaning, then yes, it was correct. At that moment, the great master airplane shooting towards the sky, assiduously struggling to recover from this episode, had not yet realized that the scum villain Shen Qingqiu had already been replaced by that unmatched hater, Peerless Cucumber. To think that, in days of yore, when this guy's rants had grown excessively ferocious, Airplane had sometimes casually cursed him, maliciously praying that no matter how peerless his cucumber was, he would never get a chance to use it for the rest of his life. Who could have expected that in some manner of speaking, this curse had been fulfilled?